Donkey Kong is back. With Donkey Kong Bonanza, we've got our first new DK game in over a decade. So to celebrate his triumphant return, I thought we should talk about the last time that DK returned after a long break with Donkey Kong Country Returns. This Wii game was not only a fresh start for DK, but also for its developer, Retro Studios. Back then, everyone thought the company was on the brink of collapse. So on this episode of Beta64, let's see how our monkey friends saved Retro Studios as we talk about the development of Donkey Kong Country Returns. But first, a word from our sponsor, FlexiSpot. As someone who works from home a lot, I know how important it is to have a solid desk with plenty of space. And I also know that I spend way too much time sitting down. Well, enter in the FlexiSpot E7 Plus, a 4-leg standing desk that is built better than the rest. Unlike typical 2-leg standing desks that max out at around 250 pounds, this 4-leg design can hold up to 540 pounds in a static position and 440 while lifting, giving you unbeatable stability and strength that can even lift me up to its maximum height of 51.57 inches. That makes it the tallest 4-leg standing desk that you can buy. It's backed by a 15-year warranty and 30-day return policy, and compared to other 4-leg standing desks that are usually over $1,000, the FlexiSpot E7 Plus is a budget-friendly option that does not sacrifice on quality. FlexiSpot is even running some mega sales right now, and if that's not enough of a deal, use my code shown on screen to get an additional $50 off the already unbeatable sale price. And while you're over there, why not see what else FlexiSpot has to offer, like their walking treadmill with 9 levels of incline adjustable by remote, a Bluetooth speaker for your music, and a solid 275-pound capacity backed by a 2-year warranty. It lets you get a workout while you get work done. So if you want an office space that works for you, head on over to FlexiSpot today. And now let's return to the development of Donkey Kong Country Returns. So let's start talking about some of the main people involved in the development of Donkey Kong Country Returns. First, Kensuke Tanabe. He's been working for Nintendo since 1986, and at this point, his main duty was to oversee first-party games that were developed outside of Nintendo. One of those first-party developers was Retro Studios. They're the ones behind Donkey Kong Country Returns. Tanabe and Retro had been working together for quite some time. The first game Retro ever made was Metroid Prime, and Tanabe was there alongside them during development. In fact, he's listed as a producer on every single Metroid Prime game that Retro has ever made. And that includes Metroid Prime Pinball and the brand new Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. And if you're wondering why I'm talking so much about Metroid, it's because it plays a vital role in the story of Donkey Kong Country Returns. So around the end of Metroid Prime 2's development, Tanabe visited Retro to talk about localizing the game in other languages. This would be around April of 2004, over 6 years before Donkey Kong Country Returns got released. Michael Kelbaugh, president of Retro Studios at the time, mentioned to Tanabe that he and his team were interested in working on a Donkey Kong game as their next release. Michael had worked on the original Donkey Kong Country series while working for Nintendo of America, and felt a special connection to the games. But even more than that, behind the scenes, the team at Retro had been experiencing franchise fatigue. They had been working exclusively on the Metroid Prime series for years, and wanted to do something different. While they were looking at all the different IPs that Nintendo had under their belt, the team thought that Donkey Kong would be a great place to start their post-Metroid journey. But Nintendo had other plans for Retro. They wanted to see more Metroid, specifically because of the upcoming Nintendo Wii. Since all these games were first-person shooters, what better way to show off the Wii remote than with a Metroid Prime 3? Not to mention, Nintendo wanted to see Retro making games that they as a company felt they could do justice to. Metroid was perfect in the hands of Retro, so they shelved the idea of a new Donkey Kong game for Metroid Prime 3. But once Prime 3 was completed, the game's director Mark Pacini made a statement on behalf of Retro Studios, saying that the company was going to be taking a break from the Metroid series. Of course, it wasn't actually the end. At the time, Retro was working on the Metroid Prime Trilogy compilation for the Wii, but it was only a small group of people that were working on Trilogy. The others at Retro were hard at work trying to figure out what they could do other than Metroid. They began making experimental tech demos and designs for other kinds of games, but those experiments did not last long.
The company was soon going to be going through a major shift that would rock retro to its very core.
In April of 2008, a few months after the launch of Metroid Prime 3, several key members from Retro Studios left the company to form Armature Studio. They went on to do a number of things, like providing development support to Fortnite, they ported tons of games to the PlayStation Vita, and more recently, they were in charge of developing Resident Evil 4 VR for the Quest 2. But where did that leave Retro Studios? They were still working on Metroid Prime Trilogy at the time, but now they were just left with a bunch of half-finished experiments that they didn't have the ability to pursue anymore. Rumors started circulating that Retro Studios was in danger of closing, but that wasn't the case. The remaining team was far from finished.
Now, while the team still had the drive to go on, that didn't mean it wasn't a major setback for them. This change was absolutely jarring. Losing such well-respected team leaders meant that they didn't have the staff necessary to continue working on those experiments. And going back to the basics, making a new Prime game, it just didn't feel right either. After the series director Mark Pacini left the company, along with Todd Keller, the lead art director, and many others influential to Metroid Prime, they were stuck. But in this dark time, one person shined brightly to break through the darkness: Miyamoto. Around the same time that this was all going down in the US, thousands of miles away in Japan, Miyamoto approached Tanabe out of the blue and told him that now was the right time for a new Donkey Kong game. But not just any Donkey Kong game, it was going to be a return to form, a new Donkey Kong Country game. Miyamoto had taken notice that many fans in North America wanted to see a new game in the series, so he asked Tanabe if he knew a development team that would be interested in handling a project like this. To which Tanabe immediately replied, "Retro Studios!" With Nintendo's approval, Tanabe approached Retro with the idea to resurrect Donkey Kong Country. This would be the first country game in over a decade, and it was Retro's chance to get a fresh start. Now, they would have to completely rethink their art design to go from realistic science fiction to whimsical cartoony worlds, but they were up for the challenge. They obviously didn't have any other planned projects, so they immediately agreed and told Tanabe they could start right away.
With both companies ready to start this new project, Retro Studios was invited to visit Nintendo's headquarters in Japan to discuss their plans for this new Donkey Kong game. But before they could head there, they actually needed to have a plan. So for a week straight, they played through every single game in the Donkey Kong Country series, researching exactly how each game was put together and how DK and his pals interacted with their environment. Now, these are not easy games. That whole week, people on the team were constantly saying that these games were so hard, but it was worth powering through. And it was part of what inspired them to make Donkey Kong Country Returns equally as difficult.
Now, they didn't simply pull all that inspiration just from Donkey Kong. They also looked into Virtual Boy Wario Land to learn how the background elements were separated, with the game making heavy use of parallax scrolling background elements that Wario could jump between. This is very similar to how Donkey Kong Country Returns plays, with Donkey Kong also jumping between the background and the foreground. And they were planning to take that inspiration a step further. As you can see in this concept art, they were thinking of having a Virtual Boy themed level in the game, but that never made it into the final version. Well, with their brains filled with inspiration, it was now time to prepare themselves to head to Japan. 3 weeks after Retro was given the go-ahead from Nintendo to work on this new Donkey Kong Country game, they were flown over for intensive meetings with Miyamoto and Iwata. To the team, this was an unbelievable opportunity, and those 2 days that they visited Nintendo's headquarters were filled with hours of discussions about Nintendo's expectations for this project. And those expectations were high. The team needed to produce a game with the highest quality, and on top of that, Miyamoto told the team in English, "Please take care of DK, he is my friend." And if that wasn't enough, Iwata told the team he was personally looking forward to playing the game with his family once it released. That's a lot of pressure. The team was very nervous. And it wasn't just meeting Nintendo's quality standards. Retro understood that the fan expectations were going to be high as well. This wasn't just making another Donkey Kong Country, they had to make a game that would be able to live up to everybody's nostalgic childhood memories of playing the original series. They did not want to disappoint. they had a great sense of responsibility to make sure it was done well. As the trip wrapped up, that sense of unease began to fade once they were able to establish a common vision for the project that both they and Nintendo could agree on. It also helped that Iwata tried to make sure that Retro felt at home during these meetings. Through the pressure, Iwata's smile helped ground the team. Iwata knew that this project was in the hands of passionate developers with a fantastic track record and a genuine love for Donkey Kong Country. In his mind, how could he not be excited to work with them? It felt like fate. That feeling is something that Retro held close throughout development. The feeling that everything that had happened up until this point, good and bad, led to this incredible opportunity. And that's why they decided to make the development code for Donkey Kong Country Returns F8, or Fate.
Now, I should make it clear that this trip to Japan wasn't just for Miyamoto to lay down a list of everything that Retro Studios had to do. Far from it. His role in this project was to help guide the team and offer feedback and mentorship. And that guidance can be pretty much summed up like this. He wanted Retro to make a new Donkey Kong game that was better than before, while keeping true to the fundamentals of the series, like with the art style and the music. He wanted those two things specifically to be kept as close to the original game as possible. And for everything else, the team was encouraged to come up with some fresh new ideas. That meant that King K. Rool and his Gremlings, they were out, and Retro made the Tikis to take their place. This made sure that people could see at first glance that this was a fresh new start for Donkey Kong Country.
After the team returned to their headquarters in Austin, Texas, everyone was ready to get to work. It would take them about 3 months before the team felt they had a solid understanding of what Donkey Kong Country Returns was going to be about. And while they were narrowing that down, the art team was also busy, trying to nail down an art style that was fresh, but also close to the original design made by Rare. They decided the best thing to do was to experiment. So all the artists went off to try out-of-the-box techniques, and then after a week or two, they'd all come together and see what worked and what didn't. It was probably around a month or so before they all decided together what the best art style for the game would be. But just because they had an art style nailed down did not mean it was smooth sailing from there. Now, even 6 months into the project, they were still having the same issue over and over again. They kept making assets that looked like they belonged in Metroid, not Donkey Kong. In interviews with Retro Studios back in the day, the game's artists would continually bring up one specific example about a palm tree, one that was made during the development of Donkey Kong Country, but ended up looking way too dark and edgy. It was almost menacing. They learned over time that they needed to make things look cuter and more saturated, but that was something they had to constantly remind themselves all the way till the end of development. In fact, some of the concept art you can unlock in the final game gives a glimpse into that more realistic look that the team was trying to stay away from. One of these early pieces shows off DK in a realistic underwater setting, which is interesting for another reason. There are no underwater levels in the final game. According to Brian Walker, the senior director of development at Retro Studios at the time, this was because the underwater segments just felt too slow and it didn't fit the fast-paced gameplay they were looking for. But from this concept art, it looks like they were at least considering it at the beginning. Oh, and since we're already looking at this realistic era of Donkey Kong Country Returns development, there's another piece of concept art from around this time that shows off a beast that never made it into the final game, the Fern Dozer, a giant robot tank made out of a barrel that cuts everything down in its path. It looks like this would have appeared in the factory world and was meant to clear out the surrounding forest. And there's also another piece of concept here that shows DK controlling one with a remote. Maybe he's using it to destroy the enemy factory, but that's all speculation. Now, as I said, as time went on, they moved away from that realistic concept art like this, which shows us a giant eel boss that never made in the final game, and they decided to sketch out other levels that were more cartoony. Like this one, which resembles Super Mario Bros. 3 with its screwed-on set-piece aesthetic. Or what about this one, that shows off a level made out of cardboard cutouts? As you can tell, there was a lot of experiments going on nailing down that art style, but that was far from the only challenge that the team had to face at this stage of development.
So keep in mind at this point in Retro's history, they had only released first-person shooters. and there is quite a big learning curve going from that to a 2D side-scrolling platformer. Now, they had worked with a third-person camera before with the Morph Ball and Metroid Prime, but this is just on a whole nother level. That being said, they decided in advance that they weren't going to start over from scratch. Even though these are two completely separate games, they decided that for Donkey Kong Country Returns, they were going to build it on the same engine that powered Metroid Prime.
Why would they do that though? Well, Retro as a company makes it a priority to invest in their tools and processes. They knew the Metroid game engine they had built inside and out, and they knew it was up for the task, even if it would have to be tweaked quite a bit. Throughout development, around 2/3 of the original codebase would have to be entirely rewritten to support this new game. But the bonus was that they were immediately able to hit the ground running and start producing prototypes right away. And whenever somebody had an idea, they could prototype so fast that sometimes they would have a playable demo ready to play before the meeting discussing the idea was even finished. Now, since it was based on Metroid, their initial prototypes had to be kind of forced into existence. For instance, they started making their first prototypes by taking a normally AI-controlled character and forcing it to be controlled by a player. This would allow multiple players to run around the Metroid world in a third-person view. And I should say that player movement was extremely important for the team. Everything about this new Donkey Kong game had to be fun on a fundamental level. With Metroid, movement wasn't nearly as important. Its emphasis was more on world building and shooting things, but Donkey Kong was a simpler game, just about a monkey running around collecting bananas. But that did not mean it was easier to make. It was actually much more complex than Prime ever was. Donkey Kong had so much more variety in his movements that at the end, they had to give him over 2,000 animations to cover it all. And one of those moves in particular was very important to Miyamoto: slamming the ground. He wanted the player to be able to swing the Wii Remote and nunchuck to feel like a monkey. And the team thought it sounded fun, so they added it in using one-to-one motion. So if you flicked the Wii Remote, DK's right hand would slam the ground, and the nunchuck would make the other hand move. And when Miyamoto played it, he did not like it. He just started pounding the table in front of the developers to show them what it was missing: rhythm. It shouldn't be boom, boom, boom. It should be ba-boom, ba-boom. You know? Yeah, okay, that's a pretty minor change. And the team was surprised that it actually mattered that much. But when they did implement it, they found it made a huge difference. They were learning that every little detail increased the quality of the game in ways you don't see at first, but you can feel it while playing. To the team, this meant that they should require the player to use a Wii Remote and nunchuck to play, and that was the plan for a while. But with the release of New Super Mario Bros. Wii, they decided to follow a similar pattern by letting the players play with a sideways Wii Remote too. Even though it wasn't quite as fun just shaking the Wii Remote up and down to slam the ground, they figured giving the option was still a good idea. But that wasn't the only thing that Miyamoto wanted to see DK do. Remember that blowing mechanic in the final game? Yeah, that was Miyamoto's idea. During a meeting with Retro, Miyamoto was given an early demo of the game and just started running back and forth over and over again for like 10 minutes, kicking up placeholder clouds of dust as he went along. After a while, he told the team, "Hey, it looks like DK's blowing." And that obviously was not the intention, it was just placeholder dust. But Miyamoto thought it would be a fantastic idea to add. When the rest of the team was told about this request, they were very, very confused. But he was onto something before, so they added it in. And it ended up being a fun feature that added a nice bit of interactivity to the environment.
Miyamoto was full of ideas during the development of Donkey Kong Country Returns. But the idea of making the game support multiplayer, that was not his idea, it was Tanabe's. In fact, Miyamoto was against the idea of adding in a second player. He wanted Retro to first and foremost focus on making a single player game. It's hard enough making a game just for one player, and it would be even harder to make a satisfying two-player experience. But Tanabe was set on the game being multiplayer, which caused quite a few headaches during the game's development.
So why was Tanabe so insistent about the game allowing for a second player? Well, the first reason was because they had never done this before in the series. All the other Donkey Kong Country games required each player to take turns, so making this the first game to allow simultaneous multiplayer, yeah, that would make it stand out from the rest of the series. In addition, it would also make it stand out from Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, which was the last Donkey Kong platformer that was released. that game was exclusively a single-player experience, and he wanted this new title to differentiate itself from Jungle Beat in that way. Not to mention, New Super Mario Bros. Wii had 4-player simultaneous multiplayer, and while that wouldn't be possible for Retro to pull off here, having 2 players on the couch playing side by side would fulfill Nintendo's desire for the Wii to feel like a console for the whole family to play together. The multiplayer mode was for the kids. Like I said before, Donkey Kong Country, it was a hard game, and this new entry in the series was gonna be no different. Because of that, it was pretty much out of the question for a small child to be able to make it to the end of the game. But that problem could be solved with multiplayer. It wasn't just about having a second player playing as Diddy Kong and running around together. They also had the ability for Diddy Kong to hop on DK's back. So if you're like Michael and want to play the game with your 5-year-old daughter, you can let her play some of the easier parts and then hop on your back when things get difficult. And speaking of difficult, no matter how good of an idea this really was, adding in a multiplayer mode was going to be a major challenge. It tripled the number of animations. And worst of all, they now had to worry about 2 players doing 2 different things on the same screen. Because of this, the camera system had to be completely reworked so it could be more dynamic. They had to make sure every piece of action was always in frame, but not pull the camera too far back, causing the art team to have to model way more of the environment than would actually be necessary. The level designs would also have to be reworked to make sure that if the second player is falling behind, they don't get stuck on a wall or get stranded with no way to catch up. But even with that camera getting a major upgrade, up until the very end, they still had to keep working on fixing a variety of bugs that happened just because one player could go right while the other player could go left. The team even joked that they should make an addendum to the manual that says do not go left, right play only. But that being said, it wasn't the most difficult part of development. Now, according to the team, it would be the first year they were working on the game. During that time, they were floundering, and they were wondering if they would ever be able to get this game done in time.
In addition to all the trouble the team had narrowing down the game's art style, they also had a very difficult time getting the boss battles right. Something about it just did not click. Both Nintendo and Retro felt they weren't able to get on the same page about what was fun. They would come to Tanabe asking if he liked what they made, and he would tell them, no, not really. But of all the problematic boss battles they had to make, the worst of them all was Mango Ruby.
So Mango Ruby is this caterpillar plant thing that ended up being the 5th boss in the final game. To defeat him, you have to grab onto spinning rings of grass to avoid the attacks and wait for the right moment to hit them. It was a fine enough battle, but at first there were no spinning rings. Instead, DK was going to swing along the top screen on vines, dropping down at just the right moment to bounce on their head, but it ended up being absolutely no fun to play. The idea of spinning rings came about during Mike Wicken's lunch break. He was the senior designer of Donkey Kong Country Returns, and after presenting that idea to Tanabe, they decided to go for it. That ended up being the route that they chose to put in the retail build, but even till the very end, Mango Ruby was such a pain to get right. And as they went into 2010, Retro took a step back and realized they only had 2 of their 8 planned boss battles completed. And this was less than a year away from the game's planned release in holiday of 2010. Not to mention, the game's big reveal was only a few months away at E3 2010 in June. They realized that at this pace, there was absolutely no way they were getting this game done in time. So Retro increased the number of programmers set to work on bosses like Mango Ruby to help speed up the process, which definitely helped. But with E3 looming over the horizon, the team needed to push themselves further so that way they could get the levels they were planning to show off as polished as they could possibly be. Pop and Planks was one of those levels, and it had to be fixed over and over again. And yeah, it turned out great, but the problem was that if they had to go through that much effort for every level in the game, it would take an extraordinary amount of time. So even though they managed to get their demo done in time for the show, they went into E3 worried in many ways. This would be the first time that anyone would see and play our game. Is it any good? Are they going to enjoy it? And if they do, are we going to be able to keep up that level of polish throughout the entire game? But ready or not, it was time to open the doors to E3 2010.
Now, up until this point, Retro had gone through great lengths to make sure that no one knew about this secret project before it was revealed at E3. Blocking off parts of their buildings to the press, making some of them sign non-disclosure agreements if by some chance they happen to see something that they shouldn't. But unfortunately, days before the show, it leaked that Retro Studios was working on a new Donkey Kong game, though no one knew for sure exactly what it was. Everyone was eagerly hoping that Nintendo would reveal this secret project at the show.
As Nintendo's keynote began, Reggie took the stage. They showed off Mario Sports Mix, Wii Party, GoldenEye 007, and attempted to show off Skyward Sword, but that one didn't go quite as well. And then, about halfway through the show, he finally revealed that for the first time in over 15 years, we were finally getting a new Donkey Kong Country game.
If you listen, you can hear it coming.
Immediately following that trailer, they spent the rest of the keynote showing off the 3DS, so the game might have gotten a bit overshadowed by the reveal of a brand new handheld game console. But still, people were very excited to see Donkey Kong again. And if you're interested in learning about the creation of the Nintendo 3DS, you gotta check out my video detailing the system's incredibly interesting development history. Did you know that the developers thought the 3DS would be impossible to make? It's true. I'll put a link to the video in the description. Alright, so we should take a look at this trailer and compare it to the final game, because there are some changes here. Nothing too crazy, the team had considered these levels pretty much finalized at the time, but there are differences to see in the trailer, because it shows off many areas of the game, like Cannon Cluster, Canopy Canyon, Stormy Shore, and there was a big focus on jungle hijinks. First off, the UI has a few color differences, like the hearts and the font used to count the bananas. And when Diddy Kong joins in, it uses a turquoise color that just became blue in the final game. And yeah, this is the same even in 2-player mode where Diddy Kong's health is separated from DK. But of course, it wasn't just the UI that changed. Donkey Kong has some animation differences in this early build. See, after this triple enemy jump, DK doesn't do a fancy spin and somersault like in the final. Here he just keeps bouncing. And then moving further ahead, this scene from the end of Mowgli's boss battle doesn't look to have that famous punching sequence added in yet. Or at least if it is there, they don't make any effort to show it off, with no icon telling the player to destroy this guy. Now what about the levels themselves? Well, if you look at the bombs the ships are blasting in Cannon Cluster, you'll notice that they move faster in this early build compared to the final game. For Stormy Shore, it's kind of up for debate whether there's an actual change here. See, it looks less stormy in the trailer when you look at it side by side with the retail build, but that could also just be down to the recording quality. But if you want to see something that's definitely different, check out this barrel sequence in Canopy Cannons. Unlike the final game, which requires the player to press the A button to blast between these barrels, the trailer shows this pointy icon on them, which means they would shoot out DK automatically. That's a very subtle change that can be easy to miss, but the same can't be said about the statues in the background. They are completely different in this sequence, exploding and crashing into each other away from the player, rather than being spooked and falling towards DK.
After Reggie showed off Donkey Kong Country Returns at the keynote, it was time for the press to actually play it. And Retro had made a nice show floor demo for the attendees to try out. It was very important to them that they got to see reactions of people playing it. This was the first time that anyone had been able to try it out outside of the company. They wanted to see what people liked and maybe didn't like. And that's why the developers hung around the booth to watch and learn.
You know, we should take a moment to watch some clips from this demo because it shows off a lot more of the game. Let's start with this early title screen, which actually looks more complex in the E3 demo compared to the final game. Not often you see that. It's also using that same early font that we saw earlier on the banana counter too. Well, what are we waiting for? Let's jump on in. We got 4 levels to play in this demo: Jungle Hijinks, Poppin' Planks, Rickety Rails, and Mowgli's Mound. These levels were chosen very deliberately. It was all meant to invoke the memories of the original Donkey Kong Country games, with the jungle atmosphere, the minecart challenges, and a nice beach to set the scene. Oh, there had to be a boss fight too. The level select screen from the E3 demo is very interesting because it later became the file select screen in the final game, with a few changes here and there with the island and the palm trees. Now the start game screen, on the other hand, that is completely different. changing from showcasing a broken down ship to some DK and Diddy Kong statues, which better represent that you're selecting how many players you want to play with. Okay, let's play a level, starting with Jungle Hijinks, and from the very beginning, things are a little bit different. The first thing the player has to do in this demo is break out of their treehouse by blasting open the door, but the final game doesn't do it quite the same. See, in that version, you aren't breaking open the door, you're beating up this Tiki that was trying to brainwash you. But since that Tiki isn't shown in the E3 demo, it makes it look like DK is just locked in his house and trying to break open the door. Once you do that and get to the ground, you're immediately met with a prompt to try out Miyamoto's blowing mechanic, which was later moved further along in the level, and instead of it just being a pop-up that appears over the dandelion, it's actually taught to you by the tutorial pig. We get a better look at this early version on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, of all places. But we can move on, because the rest of the level looks pretty much the same. Pop and Planks also looks pretty much the same as the final game. Even the level clear screen is almost identical, with the only difference being the level icon, early font, and the level clear text, which is only very slightly different. What about Mowgli's Mound though? It's pretty much the same. What about Rickety Rails? Well, that one actually has a substantial change, but not in the main level, it's in the bonus room. This is a completely different challenge, with spinning bananas instead of the final's wavy bananas. And the bonus icon is different too. Plus, the signs that used to say exit were later changed to just be an X with an arrow.
And with that, we have now covered the whole demo, and E3 has come to a close. The team returned to Retro filled with motivation and determination. The 4 levels they showed off in the demo went over great, but now it was time to finish the other 70 that were not shown at the show. In fact, the Friday before E3, the team had only just started on the final level of the game, and we're only 5 months until release. It was time to get to work.
And work they did. There was a huge bump in productivity after E3. Half of it because the public really liked what they showed, and the other reason was because they finally started seeing the core gameplay coming together. What used to feel disjointed suddenly seemed to all work together and make sense. And because of that, they were able to focus intensely on polishing up the game's presentation and level design. Now, as I said, they only had a few months left till release. That's not a lot of time. I mentioned earlier that the team went to E3 worried that if people enjoyed the demo, they would have to keep up that level of polish throughout the entire game. Well, they didn't have to worry about that for long. Before E3, they had found it difficult to determine what fun was in a platforming game, so they'd have to spend a lot of time back and forth with Tanabe to help get some guidance. But after E3, it all just clicked. Sure, it was still a ton of work, but making a game at this high level of quality no longer felt impossible to produce in time. To keep track of when a level was considered complete, the team chose to adopt a rating system around this time, which was written on a whiteboard in their meeting room. They had every level in the game listed there along with its current fun rating, with X being the worst, then triangle, then circle, and if it got a double circle, that was considered the best of the best. This rating system, though tough, made sure that these levels were going to become something extraordinary. And a lot of people on the team actually found it fun, turning this phase of development into a kind of friendly competition to try and surprise each other with new ideas that made the levels even better than before. To show off all of these new additions to the levels, the team would have Monday morning meetings in a theater room, where everyone would be able to sit down and watch playthroughs of newly created level elements, so that way they could review them together. Hearing all the others on the team going, ooh, ah, as you show off your new idea created this infectious energy throughout the last stages of development that made people want to do even better next week to surprise their fellow developers. And that wasn't the only competition. The team also had a leaderboard in the office where everyone could compete to see who could get the best times in each level. Basically, it was kind of an internal speedrunning competition. It was just something for a bit of fun that eventually led them to include a time attack mode, so advanced players would be able to easily speedrun with each other. And it's something people still use to speedrun the game to this day.
If you've watched any speedruns before, you know that every second counts. A speedrunner will stop at nothing to exploit a game's mechanics to save as much time as possible, and the dev team was no different during their competition. Some exploits they found were just cool ways of making DK do sick tricks around the environment. and others, well, they were bugs that needed to be fixed. Yeah, all the way until the very end, there was still quite a bit of debugging to do.
Getting feedback from playtesters is vital for game development. Not only having them find bugs, but also listing out what caused them to happen so that way they can be recreated in debugging environments. Thankfully, another feature they were adding to the game ended up helping out immensely with this: Super Guide. You know how in some Mario games you can do so bad that Luigi pops up just to beat the level for you? Well, the team pretty much did the same thing with Donkey Kong Country Returns, but instead of Luigi, it was Super Kong. This was a huge pain to implement, because it meant they would have to alter their player package so that way the game could read from a list of inputs and do it all in a way that would produce the same result every time. But all that work paid off in more ways than expected, because they realized, hey, we can use that for debugging. We can record playtesters' inputs and play them back in a debug environment, so that way we don't have to recreate them anymore. Things like that optimized their development process so much. They were fixing bugs left and right, levels were being marked off with double circle ratings, and it was just about time for them to submit their game for lot check. In case you don't know, Lot Check is a subsidiary of Nintendo of America that checks over first and third party games to confirm that they open properly, don't have any critical bugs that prevent people from playing the game, things like that. Well, right before Retro Studios was going to send off their complete build of Donkey Kong Country Returns, they came across an issue. It wasn't anything game-breaking, they just noticed an extremely rare situation that could occur where a moving slope platform would cause the player to move in an unexpected way. It wasn't the end of the world, but it would be very frustrating for the player. Once again, this was extremely rare, and with it being so close to Lot Check, it wouldn't be worth going in and fixing it, right? We could just flatten out the platform and the movement so it's not an issue. And that's what they did, at first. But after Tanabe played it, he told the team that they needed to keep that slope movement. It just added something to the level that wasn't there before. Okay, so the team did the unthinkable. 3 days before Lot Check, they went in and changed fundamental code that is used throughout the entire game for every single platform. I know, it sounds crazy. Why would you do that? Well, it's because they wanted to. They wanted to make sure this game that they poured their everything into hit a level of quality that the public was hoping for, Nintendo expected, and that the team wanted to produce. And thankfully, it all worked out. According to the build date left over in the final version of the game, the team finally completed their game on October 14th at 12:29 a.m. That is barely a month before the game was actually released. But that was par for the course for Retro. They're known for making changes till the very last second, just to make sure that everything feels right. That's what sets them apart, and it's why their games are so beloved, no matter the genre.
Donkey Kong Country Returns released on November 21st, 2010, which is the 16th anniversary of Donkey Kong Country. And in less than a month, worldwide sales came in at over 4 million. It was an incredible success. But even more importantly for the team, after the game released, after they had proven that Retro Studios had a bright future ahead, they met with Iwata and asked him if he was having fun playing the game with his family. And he said that yeah, they were having a lot of fun.
Hey, hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in supporting more Beta64, check out the Patreon. I've got exclusive new videos every single week over there, and you can even get your name on future Beta64 episodes like these lovely producers here. Click the link on screen, or you can check it out in the description and become a Patreon supporter of Beta64 today.